Hello, everybody. I hope that you're doing well and you can hear me okay. I am doing this recording for week, I believe, 3, and this is going to be the second lecture for general nutrition. I am Mrs. Frazier. I hope you all are doing well. I am doing the recordings for you guys, so you can do this at your own convenience. That's the good thing about having asynchronous class, so you can do at your own convenience. I am trying to get through all of my lectures, or not lectures, my emails. So I just wanted to check in with you, make sure you guys are doing well, and to go through what we're going to be starting over the next 2 weeks. So each module, again, is going to be 2 weeks long. Okay, so this goes into chapter 2 and 4 in the Human Nutrition PDF textbook that you guys have. It's kind of like an ebook. So we're going into chapter 2 and chapter 4. So that is the human body and carbohydrates. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see my screen here. And we're going into general nutrition. Okay, and I'm going to be doing a few, the roundup is the lecture, so I'm going to change that name into lecture, recorded lecture for you guys to watch. So this video is for your convenience. That's the good thing about this course, is the lectures. You can watch these recorded videos of the lecture, and then also what we provide for you. Okay, so that's going to be what the roundup is. Okay, so it's going to be recorded roundup, and you're going to do a summary of what we're discussing in this recorded video. Okay, again, we're going to be talking about chapter 2 and 4. Okay, and making sure you just walk through this. Do the best you can. Please email me. When you email me, put in the subject of the issues that you're having. Again, I am trying to get through my emails, so just be patient with me. It's good to see you guys are responding and also giving me the sand dollars, or the silver dollars, to say, hey, this doesn't look right. Hey, this doesn't look right. So I appreciate that. That's great. So let's get started into chapter 2 on the human body. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen and it looks okay and you can hear me okay. All right, so the human body. So objectives in this chapter, we're going to explain how food moves through the digestive system, describing the actions of the organs, the muscles, digestive systems, and more. Also what absorption is, okay? And hopefully most of you guys have taken anatomy and physiology, or you're going to take anatomy and physiology, so some of this is a review, or some of this is a little bit fresh, but that's okay. Please comment or email me if you have questions or concerns. We're going to talk about the other systems throughout the body, the circulatory system, and how nutrients are routed into the circulatory system and the GI tract in the body, as well as identify the nutrients entering the direct blood, going into the blood and getting absorbed that way in the lymphatic system. Also the health and regulation of the GI tract, and also how good gut bacterial hormones and nerves influence the health and gut of our GI tract. Okay, so this is an exciting chapter. So digestion is breakdown of foods into nutrients. Okay, this is a big one here. Okay, what nutrients are? They break food down into the nutrition, into nutrients for our bodies to process, transforming it into where it could be absorbed. Okay, so the challenges of digestion: multitask of the mouth, passage through the diaphragm, steady movement, lubrication, digestive enzymes, and then excretion into the waste. So your body is a mechanic. It's doing what it needs to, so we don't have to really think about it. It's a wonderful machine that we have, that we need to be appreciative. Now I'm not sure if this is going to show on here. It looks like it is. Still doing it. Okay, so we're going to watch this video, and I will post this as well.
To the food our children eat once it's entered their mouths. So let's start by drawing a very basic model of digestion. Now, the food our children eat can be broken down into three categories, and they're categories of what we call macronutrients. And all of these macronutrients are digested in slightly different ways, so I'm going to color code them so that we can sort of follow what happens to each of these categories of macronutrients. So the major macronutrients are carbohydrates, I'll write carbs for short, fats, and proteins. When we use the term micronutrients, we're talking about things like vitamins and minerals and the other important components in the food that we eat. Now, the digestive tract is actually just a long tube that extends from the mouth all the way down to the anus. So we're going to follow that tube and trace the path of food after it enters the mouth and as it passes down this long tube that leads all the way through the digestive system. Digestion actually begins in the mouth with the act of chewing. That's an important part of digestion that we sometimes overlook because it makes big pieces of food. It breaks them down into smaller, more manageable pieces that can be attacked by the different enzymes, and some of those actually are secreted directly into the oral cavity or the mouth by accessory glands called salivary glands. And the salivary glands secrete saliva, surprisingly. And in that saliva are a couple of different enzymes, and I'm going to color code the enzymes as well. So the first enzyme that's in the saliva is called amylase, and amylase works to begin the digestion of carbohydrates. That's why I've done it in purple. We call that salivary amylase because there's also another kind of amylase that comes into play later on in the digestive tract. The other enzyme found in saliva is called lipase. And we also call that salivary lipase because there's a different kind of lipase that comes into the picture later on. And lipase begins the digestion of fats. That's why I've drawn it in yellow. So food is chewed in the mouth and then swallowed down in the form of what we call a bolus. And it's sort of, that bolus has been mixed up with the salivary juices or the salivary enzymes. And it passes down a tube called the esophagus. This is the esophagus. And the esophagus leads down into a dilated part of this tube that we call the stomach. So this is the stomach. And there's actually a sphincter here, or it's kind of like a valve that we call the lower esophageal sphincter that guards the entryway to the stomach. And if that valve becomes leaky, then food can actually leak up from the stomach and give us heartburn. That's where heartburn happens. So once food enters the stomach, it gets mixed with a bunch of other things that are secreted by the stomach. Things like hydrochloric acid or stomach acid, and I'll just write HCl because that's the chemical abbreviation for hydrochloric acid. The stomach also secretes a digestive chemical called pepsin. And pepsin, I'll draw it in green because pepsin, you guessed it, it digests proteins. And the other thing that the stomach secretes is a chemical called lipase. And this is gastric lipase. Gastric means it comes from the stomach. And just like the salivary lipase, the gastric lipase continues the work of digesting the fats that have entered the stomach. Now, the stomach is really muscular, so it kind of churns all this food around, the food that's come down the esophagus as a bolus. And what ends up leaving the stomach is more of a liquid, and we call that liquid chyme. That's what leaves the stomach. And it leaves the stomach through another valve or sphincter. That's the pyloric sphincter.
Very important.
That's a good word for a spelling bee. Okay, so once the chyme has passed through the pyloric sphincter, it enters into the first part of the small intestine, and that part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. I'll just write that in. And some really important things happen in the duodenum, or the duodenum as it's sometimes called. And what happens there is that the liver secretes a chemical called bile. And that bile is stored sometimes when it's not needed immediately. It's stored, so it's created in the liver, and I'll just draw it kind of coming out of the liver. And then it actually is stored in a small organ called the gallbladder. That's over here. So the gallbladder is going to store the bile. I'm just going to write that in for you. That's our gallbladder. And this is our liver. And then when the bile is needed, and I'll just write the bile in here in yellow, so you can probably guess what the bile is used to digest. When the bile is needed, it's secreted out of the gallbladder and it enters the duodenum right about here. And there's another accessory organ that also sort of dumps its products into the duodenum right about there at the same spot. And I'll draw that one in blue. And this accessory organ is called the pancreas. And the pancreas is really important. It secretes probably the most important digestive enzymes into the small intestine. And those enzymes are amylase, and this is now pancreatic amylase. It also secretes pancreatic lipase, another way of digesting fat. And then it secretes two enzymes that are used in the digestion of protein. One is called trypsin, and its cousin, chymotrypsin. So all of that exciting stuff happens in the duodenum. And after that, the small intestine continues. And it continues on for anywhere from about 15 to 30 feet. So it's really long and coiled up on itself. I'm drawing it kind of spread out. These coils of small intestine are actually all curled up on top of each other. The second part of the small intestine, and I'll just try and give you a sense of how long this part of the tube is. And the second part of the small intestine is called the jejunum. Jejunum. And then the last part of the small intestine is called the ileum. And basically, the small intestine is where big particles of food are broken down into their absorbable units and absorbed in this tube, the small intestine. What happens next is that the small intestine joins the large intestine. And the large intestine is sort of like a storage and drying unit, if you will. And it kind of curls around, and there's an ascending portion, a transverse portion, and the one I'm drawing now, the descending portion of the large intestine. And it ends in an S-shape part that we call the sigmoid colon. So this would be your ascending portion of the large intestine, the transverse, and the descending here. I'll just write D-E-S for lack of space. Now, what's absorbed in the large intestine are things like excess water, so the longer feces, because this is ultimately going to be feces that's excreted out once it passes through the sigmoid colon. This is our end product of digestion, and feces is going to pass out through the anus. So the longer the feces sits in the large intestine, the drier it's going to get, because water is being absorbed and some solutes are also being absorbed in that tube. So the food we eat is going to be chewed up in the mouth and swallowed in the form of a bolus. The bolus is going to pass down the esophagus and through the lower esophageal sphincter into the stomach, where it's going to be mixed with stomach acid and things like pepsin and lipase and turned into chyme. That chyme is going to pass through the pyloric sphincter and it's going to head down into the duodenum. And in the duodenum, bile from the liver and the gallbladder is going to be secreted into this part, as well as the pancreatic digestive enzymes like amylase, lipase, trypsin, and chymotrypsin. So while this food is digesting into its smaller absorbable parts, it's also being absorbed as it passes through this long tube. And you can see how much time there is here to absorb all of the nutrients, because we don't want food to pass through here without enough time for those important nutrients to be absorbed. And then it gets here to the large intestine, and this valve, I didn't put this in, but this is called the ileocecal valve, because it's between the ileum and the cecum. And interestingly, in case you're interested here, this is where the appendix is. It's a little kind of pocket extension of the cecum. And if, for example, you eat a grape and you swallow all of the seeds and you have pretty bad luck, then one of those seeds might get stuck in here and this appendix might get clogged and fill up with pus, and then you've got yourself an appendicitis. But if you're lucky and that doesn't happen, then the food that couldn't be either digested or absorbed passes into this ascending colon and slowly moves up through the transverse colon and down the descending colon as it's kind of progressively dried and stored. And then once it enters the sigmoid colon, then a bowel movement is triggered and feces are secreted through the anus. And that is sort of the big picture of how digestion works. Now, I just want you to have kind of a window into what it looks like if we took, let's say, a cross section through this small intestine. Let's say I took a slice like this out of the small intestine. What you would see would be a muscular tube like this. Let's say this is the chunk we've just cut out. And that tube on the inside is going to have these kind of finger-like projections. And these finger-like projections are called villi. So this is a villus, but I'll write the plural term, which is villi. And I'll just make this arrow point to two of them so you understand that that's the plural term. And the villi, what they do is they increase the surface area for absorption of all of those important nutrients that are going to be found in the lumen. So the proteins, the fats, and the carbohydrates that are going to be passing through this lumen. And better yet, to further increase the surface area, there are these kind of small, they look like hair-like projections projecting off of the villi. And this is what we call the brush border. These are called microvilli, or smaller villi, and the microvilli make up the brush border. And what that does is it further increases the surface area for absorption in the small intestine. Now, just to give you another view of what the small intestine looks like, what happens if I were to give you another cross section that looks like this through the wall of the small intestine? What if we were to kind of slice it open? What you would see, you have your muscular wall here, and here are your finger-like projections called villi. Because we've zoomed in a bit, you can actually see that the brush border or the microvilli are actually made up of cells called enterocytes. And each of these cells has their own nucleus, and they're actually selective cells that can aid in the absorption of all of the important nutrients in the small intestine. So these guys are called enterocytes. Now, inside each of these villi, these finger-like projections, is something called a central lacteal. And the central lacteal is actually sort of a projection of the lymphatic system. So the central lacteals are continuous with the lymphatic system. And because I'm drawing them in yellow, you might guess that the fats that are going to be in this lumen, and they've been emulsified by the bile they've been broken down into smaller pieces by the gastric lipase and the salivary lipase and the pancreatic lipase. All of these small units of fat are going to be absorbed into the central lacteal and pass into the lymphatic system. Now, there's also in each of these villi, there is a little capillary network. So each of these villi, each of these central lacteals is surrounded by a network of capillaries that bring blood toward the villus and then also take blood away. As capillary networks do, they carry blood away from an area. So the proteins and carbohydrates, these are our carbohydrates, and these are our proteins. And these guys are going to be absorbed directly into the bloodstream, into the capillary networks that sort of surround these central lacteals. There are our carbohydrates going in. So you can see that this is how the small broken down particles of the food that we eat actually get into our bodies, get into our bloodstream. And next, we're going to be looking at how our body uses those building blocks for either energy, for growth, or for storage in the human body.
I love this video because it really makes it easy. You can even screenshot this because it breaks down a lot very simply. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me go back into here. Let's see. And I'll be posting this so you can see it in different parts of the module, okay? All right, so we learned a lot about the anatomy of the digestive tract, known as the GI tract. Starts as gastrointestinal tract, flexible and muscular. So we have the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and then anus. Okay, so that's how the process is. It is a continuous, although digestion begins in the mouth, most digestion occurs in the stomach and small intestine. Important note to remember. Absorption takes place primarily in the small and large intestine. So that gives you an idea. People think, oh, right when you digest, it takes time. It's breaking down for absorption, mostly in the small and large intestine. Okay, so be aware of that. And this is another diagram here, breaking down, okay, from the mouth, your different glands, and then that pyloric sphincter right here, the lower right here, you want to be aware of that. You're going to know that going into, obviously in anatomy physiology, but when you're going into nursing or any healthcare area, that is important to be aware of. Just, as your career starts to, you start learning more, okay? All right. So terms to familiarize yourself with, okay? So we started talking about, the appendix, the duodenum, the esophageal sphincter, esophagus, gallbladder, jejunum. So these you want to be aware of and familiarize yourself with these terms. If you don't already know, I would start to review. Again, it's in your book, but I just want you to pay attention to these terms as well, okay? So this lecture is to kind of give you a guide on what to review on, just brushing through it real quickly. Not real quickly, just brushing through what we're kind of looking at here in these two chapters, but over the next 2 weeks, okay? All right, so the mouth, 5 senses to be aware of. So that's like sweet, bitter, sour, salty, and savory, okay? Aroma, texture. So your body is already, when you're looking at food, when you're smelling food, it's already starting that process of breaking down, digestion, okay? And then the sphincter, you have an upper and lower esophageal sphincters. Pay attention to that, be aware. Pyloric sphincter opens into the small intestine. That's very important to be aware of, okay? And then going into the colon, in that video, I was talking about ascending, transverse, descending. Okay, this is what she was talking about. Okay. That breaks it down. And peristalsis, very important to familiarize yourself with this term. It's singular longitudinal muscle, works together, pushing. So it's working, it's turning the food and paring down all the food and nutrients. It's chiming, okay? So it's working as a kind of like a machine. Something to note, and you'll learn later on, but just when you're on certain medications, this process kind of sometimes slows down because of other medications, because of medications that you're taking. Okay, so be aware of that. That's what causes constipation, things like that. And certain factors might affect and interfere with peristalsis. Okay, okay. So these are the different longitudinal, circulator, and just the different types of how the muscle is of the stomach. Okay, examples of a sphincter: opens and closes. Okay, secretion, 5 organs. So knowing these are important in digestion. Okay, and we'll learn more about this for acid-base balance, but how in this, just quickly, what bile, how more basic, and the juices, saliva, and then gastric juices, more acidic to help break down the food. Okay. The pancreatic juices and intestinal enzymes to help break food down. Okay, so this is a great chart to pay attention to look through what the actions do, the target organs, the organ and the gland, what they do. So pay attention to this slide. Okay, and the final stage, going into the colon. Okay, absorbs and recycle materials, water and other salts, dissolved salts. Okay, so this kind of gives you a breakdown of what that other video had post. Okay, and then now we're going into absorption. Okay, paying attention to these, kind of what that video was going for, the villi, the microvilli. Those are very important to be aware of. Small intestinal villi, that's kind of what the video is kind of breaking down. You'll see in the book, preparing nutrients for transport. That's one of its major of when you're absorbing, when your body's absorbing nutrients into the bloodstream. And then the circulatory system, closed system of vessels, heart pump. Blood delivers oxygen and nutrients, removes carbon dioxide and waste, blood flow. That's why it's so important to pay attention. You know, you want to try to have as best good blood flow. That's why it's always, you know, important to eat well and take care of your body. Okay. The vascular system, the liver, how important the liver is and how it filters. It's one of the major organs that regenerates itself, as well as filters out a lot of different things. Okay, this does a lot of different things in the body. Okay, lymphatic system. All right, and the gastrointestinal microbiome. This is a very important to be aware of. Please highlight this. Digestion of fibers and complex proteins, probiotics and prebiotics, and healthy gut bacteria. And so this helps fight a lot of infection, but having a strong microbiome is so essential in overall health that they're finding in many studies. And I'll be posting some of those studies on here, but there's a lot popping up of how important this is for overall health. Okay. Gastrointestinal hormones and nerve pathways, GI hormones, gastrin, secretin, and then CCK, chylomicron. Okay. All right, so this is into choking now. All right, and I will post another video on lecture 2 going over carbohydrates, but I just want you guys to pay attention to the modules here when we're doing the roundup. So these are pretty much the lecture videos that I'll be posting, but I'll be posting on videos for you guys to watch, okay? And then please just make sure you do your assignments. Again, this is a 2-week module. So this will be this week, which is the 14th, until I believe, let's see, 1, 2, till the 27th. Okay. All right. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I'll be posting another video. All right. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Or good night.